Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is my game of choice. I love it, I run it regularly, and I plan to continue that for the time being. However, no game system is perfect, and there are some things I can't stand about the system. This video will cover 6 of them. So let's go. Hi everybody, my name is Nate, and you are watching WASD20, a channel about tabletop RPGs and fantasy maps. So firstly, I want to re-emphasize that I think D&D 5e is a really good system. Some of you might disagree with me on that, but personally, I like it. I appreciate the art and layout, the book craft, and I think the system itself strikes a good balance of complexity and options while also maintaining a level of simplicity, speed, and the ability to customize. I fully understand that a lot of people can't stand that I just said those nice things about 5e. A lot of people really hate the system. Maybe it's the books, or maybe it's the greedy Hasbro corporate empire. Yes, Wizards of the Coast is owned by Hasbro. So those people may not be satisfied with my critiques, and I encourage them to compile their own list of grievances down in the comments. Or, write a blog or make your own video or something. But anyway, for me, I just think it's healthy to process, whine and complain a little bit. And my hope is that as I do so, I might even think of some simple solutions to some of my own problems with the game, or even better, get suggestions from you. All right, my 6 grievances. The first one is ultra serious and nearly breaks it all to pieces for me. Not really. It's kind of a dumb complaint, but we're going to air all the dirty laundry here. Why do they call it armor class when it's not just about armor? How does a monk or a barbarian with no armor have such a high armor class? So obviously the answer to this question is it doesn't just represent your armor. With monsters, it could be the natural armor, the thickness of hide or the hardness of scales. But it's also heavily dependent on your dexterity, and more broadly means how good you are at not getting hurt when attacked or avoiding the attack altogether. But then why do we call it armor class? Why don't they call it defense? Tradition. That's the way it's always been done. That's true of a lot of things in D&D, like why they'll probably never deviate from the traditional 6 ability scores. I get it. The word armor class is a key part of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's probably worth hanging on to. Still, it's confusing for new players, and when there are so many new things to keep track of when creating a character, it's one more barrier to feeling like you get it. You get it? All right, my next complaints have to do with death as well as rest and healing. But first, I'd like to thank my sponsor for this video, Ancient Lair, who is currently running a Kickstarter for campaign medals. These are beautiful medals in a variety of finishes inspired by D&D 5e adventures that you can give to your players as a memento from a brutal campaign perhaps, or use as a prop or magic item or some really cool coins in your game, or whatever you want. They just look great. You can also get them in resin, or you can get the STL file to 3D print them on your own. And they're including an awesome looking adventure module that uses the metals called the Binding Stones. Go check it out now by using the Kickstarter link down in the video description. Thanks, Ancient Lair. All right, my second complaint about D&D 5e is that death is slow and rare. And really, the next 3 points all have to do with the idea that D&D 5e just isn't very gritty or realistic. I get that some people don't want that, but the last few years I've been drawn more to that style. Maybe if I start heading down that direction, I'll find that the grass isn't actually greener on the other side, but anyway, death. Both as a player and as a DM, I have found character death to be pretty rare in 5th edition. I think one would be hard-pressed to call D&D 5e a deadly game. Some people really like that it's not deadly, and overall a game that's too deadly I think can have some negative consequences, like people just not being attached to their characters and not really being all that invested in developing a character, backstory, relationships, and growth. But the reality is I pretty frequently see characters brought to 0 hit points and therefore knocked unconscious, and yet I've gotten used to the idea that this character probably isn't going to die. It doesn't feel very perilous, and I fully admit that this might just be my fault when I DM. I have not made my game deadly enough. Still, even as a player, I've just found it's really easy to survive these little knockouts. First off, unless a character is hit really hard, there are several chances to make death saving throws. And while this actually does create some fun tension, these are some high stakes rolls. If the party sees this going poorly, it's usually not that difficult for an ally to stabilize their fallen friend. And before too long, you're back up and ready to go. Even if you do use the lingering injuries chart from the DMG, which I really like and I do, a bunch of them are instantly solvable by a cleric with healing spells, and a bunch more are solvable by powerful forms of magic. Now, there are probably lots of ways you could solve these issues. I had one character who got knocked unconscious quite a bit. After about the third time in 3 sessions, I told him we were going to do a maximum of 10 times knocked unconscious before his character would die for good. It's like, after your 10th concussion, you're just going to be a vegetable, or you might die completely. Sorry, be more careful. To me, this infuses an element of realism and danger, which I find exciting. I've also considered making death saves secret. What if the DM rolled them behind the screen for the players, so the players didn't know if that character might die? Could be kind of fun. Anyway, related to this complaint, the next thing I can't stand about 5e is resting and healing. As with the previous complaint, part of this comes down to us as DMs. We probably need to make it harder for our players to rest, especially in the middle of a dungeon. Some groups might want that more epic, heroic feel, and that's fine. But for me, I generally don't like how easy it is to recover hit points. Rolling a bunch of hit dice during a short rest seems dumb. Like, you can just hang out for 30 minutes and a 4th level character could easily regain 20 hit points.
It just don't seem right.
So fortunately for this one, there are some alternate rules in the DMG for this stuff. For example, healer's kit dependency, where someone has to expend 1 use of a healer's kit to be able to spend any hit dice to recover. Or slow and natural healing, where a player can't just automatically regain all their hit points at the end of a long rest. Rather, you have to spend hit dice at the end of a long rest, not just short. Or if you want to go with the gritty realism rest variant in the DMG, you could say a short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is 7 days. Which actually makes a whole lot of sense. If you're seriously wounded, the notion that you can just hop back up to full health after 8 hours of sleep is a little ridiculous. Now, ultimately, I want to make clear that my calling out 5e as not deadly enough might make it seem like I want a completely realistic simulation of reality. But that is definitely not true. The most realistic game, the most simulationist game, will not be the best game in my book. It has to have a balance, concessions have to be made to make the game fun, and to make it a bit of an escape from reality. I happen to think 5e is fun. Still, I think dealing differently with rest and healing, as well as death itself, could make the game more exciting. I think a game where the threat of character death is ever present is more exciting. And honestly, I think the occasional character death makes for some good stories. My 4th point and the last one on the topic of grittiness, hit points. The thing that bugs me is that as your hit points go down, even getting near 0, your effectiveness in combat does not decrease. Now listen, I can handle the fact that if you're getting low on hit points, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are injured. I can handle the fact that each time you're hit, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting another cut or stab. It could just mean you're getting worn down, nearer to the point where your enemy will be able to more easily sneak past your defenses to deal that killing blow. Still, it does seem that at some point in combat, you not only become more prone to death, but less prone to hurting your opponent. This is one of the many things I appreciate about the game Forbidden Lands, which definitely goes for the more gritty, low fantasy vibe. Your strength pool is kind of like your hit points and your attack score. Now that I mention it, I think maybe Numenera does this too. Now, Forbidden Lands I actually haven't played. It's been on my must-play list for months, and I really want to run it sometime soon, so I'll say that it's totally possible that I'll dislike the gritty, realistic style and just think it's too deadly and not fun. But I'm attracted to the idea, and I guess stay tuned for an update on that at some point. Next up, I hate the XP budget system. Does anyone really use this? I mean, okay. I guess, as I'm looking at it, it's really not that bad. It's probably a pretty decent system if you really want balanced encounters. And, it's not a necessary part of the game, so I guess it's good it exists for some people who might benefit from it. It does seem to get you closer to encounter balance than going just by challenge rating. But for me, I don't need perfect balance. I ballpark using challenge rating and looking at the actual monster stats and then my players' stats. And even if I did want to get closer to balance, this makes my head hurt. I'm probably just not a very patient person, and I definitely do have a short attention span. So, XP budget, you're not so bad. At least you're easy to ignore. The last thing that bugs me about D&D 5th edition is its kitchen sink fantasy. This is one of its greatest strengths, for sure. It's one of the reasons it's so popular. There are a huge variety of locations, races, cultures. Almost any fantasy character you can imagine can fit in this game. Some have called it vanilla fantasy, but to me it's more like all the flavors mixed together. Like a 9-year-old getting a Slurpee at 7-Eleven. A little of this, a little of that. Oh, you want some gnomes and tieflings? Oh yeah, you want some airships? Yeah, we can do that. Again, it's a great strength of the system. However, if I want to play a really specific fantasy setting where there might be fewer races or where magic is not very prevalent or has a more specific way of working, that's sometimes a hard sell for players because the cat's already out of the bag. They've already given us everything but the kitchen sink. Players generally don't like feeling limited by the constraints of your little homebrew world or rules. If it's in a book, I should be able to have it, which I don't agree with, and some groups probably handle these limits very well, but it does make it difficult for a DM with a more specific vision than the kitchen sink. So this is one of the reasons I really enjoy taking breaks from 5e to play things like Tales from the Loop or Simba Room, where there is just this very specific setting and it feels smaller. There's like a specific history and storyline. And this is huge, rules that support that very specific setting and history, allowing for some really cool synergy. Now, this can be done with some tweaking of the 5e rules. Just look at Adventures in Middle-earth, which is its own setting and story with its own races and very specific rules, yet it's all built on the basic structure of the 5th edition system reference document. Still, I wouldn't call over friends to play this saying it's D&D 5e. I'd say, let's play some Adventures in Middle-earth. It's kind of its own thing. A player showing up with a tiefling warlock will be sorely disappointed when the lore master rejects their character concept. Again, there's a place for the kitchen sink approach, but I often find myself wanting something a little more specific and kind of reined in. So, D&D 5e, I love you, but sometimes I just need a little break, okay? Sometimes you just drive me crazy. All right, I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. What are some of the things you like or dislike about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? And I would love to hear from you what other game systems you like and which of them might even address some of the complaints I've aired here. I want to thank my patrons so much for their support. Patrons, you rock. These are people who give to the channel on a monthly basis and make this content possible. So thanks so much, patrons. You can actually join with them and get some pretty cool rewards as well. Just check it all out over at patreon.com/WASD20. All right, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Make sure you're subscribed and go ahead and hit that little bell button down below if you want to get notifications when I post new videos. Don't forget to check out the Ancient Lair Kickstarter for campaign medals down below. And everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.